All right, so in the last module I gave you guys, we talked about, editing images. We talked about using Photopea, which is a raster image editing program. It's kind of similar to Photoshop or Clip Studio Pro if you use that. We also talked about Figma, which we're actually going to use Figma more in the UX part of this course, and that is a vector image editing software. So we talked about, how to create graphics, some very basics. I recommend if you want to learn more about Photoshop or raster, I would take the digital, I think it's 9 or 8, which is the digital photography class, or I think it's been rebranded as Photoshop, or take the digital 4A, which is the digital illustration / Adobe Illustrator class. Note that if we want to, we can use these programs to create the images and to edit them, crop them and things like that. And we can also use them to set them up to the right format. Okay, so if we want to use images on the web, there's currently 4 image formats that we can use as of this date, which is fall 2022, which is we can use JPEGs, we can use GIF files, we can use PNG files. Those are for raster. If it's a vector, we can use what's referred to as an SVG file. Okay. There's some pros and cons for some of these format, as in some of them have properties that some other of the image formats don't. So for instance, if you had a transparent background that you wanted to use, preserve as transparent, you could do that with a GIF. This has what's called preserves transparency. That's something you can't do with a JPEG. JPEGs are good for smaller file sizes. They're very good at compression. Small file sizes are good, obviously. We talked about this for web development. Anytime you can lower the size of a file, the file will download faster. So that's good for smaller file sizes. GIFs can also be animated. That's something that you cannot do with a JPEG. An animated GIF is, oops. I'm sure you guys. An animated GIF would be something like this. Mr. Dancing Banana. Bouncing. Penguins. Flying birds. Things like this. Psychedelic guy doing a walk cycle. That's something you can do with an animated GIF. Can't do that with a JPEG. PNGs are good for small file sizes, or they're good for photorealistic images. A photorealistic image is an image with millions and millions of colors in it, like a picture you take of you and your family or your friends. And you can also preserve transparency, which means it can keep a transparent background. So what I mean by transparent background is, let's say you had in Photopea or Photoshop or whatever program you're using. I'm just going to make a new document really quickly. So let's say I have this shape here. This red triangle in this particular case. So this area around it is transparent. It's empty. There's no content there. If you wanted to preserve this when you bring it to a web page, it would have to be saved as either a PNG or a GIF file. JPEGs don't understand the concept of a transparent pixel, so if you exported this as a JPEG, see how it actually fills it in with a color? Typically it'll be white, okay? Whereas if I was to export this as a GIF, see how it preserves that now? Okay. So those are just some general things just to keep in mind when deciding on the images you want to use for your website. All right, so I have some images here for you, and they're all saved to the appropriate format. They're JPEGs and GIFs, and there's a couple that are SVGs. So here's a cute little JPEG. Everyone say aww. I got some animated GIFs just for fun. Wee, dancing globy thing, whatever that is. This is an SVG. Okay. So let's put them into our web page. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about it right now, but the major thing to note is make sure your web page, your HTML file, and the image are in the same folder. Okay, this is important. There's a reason why, and I'm going to talk about it in the next module. I don't really want to get into it right now, but it basically has to do with what's called file management. So here's exercise 4. Notice that all of the images are in the same folder. Okay, that's important. If you do not have the images and the HTML in the same folder, it's going to cause some issues and it may not work properly. Okay, that's all you need to know right now. There is a reason, and I will talk about it later, but not at the moment. So if I want to add an image, so let's just take a look at this. This is my web page. It's got some paragraphs here. Let's preview this in the browser. Looks like this. I already actually have an image here. So I want to add an image. Okay, so we're going to use, I actually want to bring in sample1.jpg, which is this cute picture of a puppy dog here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to use a new tag that I haven't taught you guys. It's called IMG. IMG is short for image. That helps you remember it. Okay. So I'm going to preview this in a browser. And the image of the puppy isn't going to come through. Okay. And even if I preview this in a, sometimes depending on the browser you have, you might get a slightly, you might get like a little broken image icon link. Depends on the browser you're using and the version of the browser and all that. Okay, so this is, I'm not going to do it, but basically the image is not coming through. Okay, now why is it not coming through? Well, let's think about what I'm trying to do. Okay, normally when I'm structuring something like a paragraph, all of the content is inside of the web page, right? I'm trying to make a paragraph and here's the text for the paragraph, right? Or I'm trying to make something bold, you know, and the text would be inside of the web page that I'm trying to make bold, right? But if you think about it, the information for the image isn't in this tag at all. Like, this is saying there is an image, right? But the image, all the image data is actually stored here in this sample1.jpg, right? So in other words, I got to go get that image data and bring it into this web page. So in other words, my web page is referencing the existing image, the sample1.jpg. Okay, so essentially what's going on here is we got an HTML page. There's a separate JPEG or a separate image. Doesn't have to be a JPEG. It could be any of those images I was talking about. And my HTML page is going to reference that image to get the data from it, the image data. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we can do that by adding an HTML attribute, which gives it, remember, HTML attributes give additional information, called src. src is short for source, so if that helps you remember. Okay. src. Source is like a kind of a, basically what source means is like, where is the file? Okay. The file we want to, and that's a, it goes inside quotation marks because it's a attribute value. And so what we want to put in here is the name of the image that I want to reference, which in this case is sample1.jpg. Files, remember, files are case sensitive. So capital, if it's a lowercase s, it's got to be lowercase s. If it's an uppercase s, it's got to be an uppercase s. Oops. So you can see here that everything is lowercase, and so I matched that right here. Visual Studio Code will even put a little icon here of what the image will be, so you know it's working. Okay, I'm going to save, and let's go back and just refresh. And there's my picture of a dog. Okay, so it worked. One thing I wanted to point out is you might have noticed that this IMG tag is a little different than, say, the P tag or, you know, the head tag or the title tag. All of these tags that we dealt with had closing tags, right? That's kind of the whole idea. Is most of HTML is, you know, tag, opening tag, closing tag, right? But the IMG tag, and there's some other tags that don't require this. Okay, we call these empty tags or one-sided tags. So that kind of begs the question, like, well, why? Why do we need a closing tag here and we don't need a closing tag for this? You know, what's the difference? So I want you to think about what a closing tag does. If I didn't have this P tag here, this one on line 24, this paragraph would never end, right? Because the browser doesn't know when the paragraph ends. I literally have to say, okay, now the paragraph is done. And the browser's like, okay, I got it. You know. So without this, the paragraph never finishes. Or in the same way, if I don't have this, the title never finishes. It just goes on forever. Or if I don't have this closing head tag, the page just goes on, you know, the head section goes on forever. I have to literally say, okay, browser, we're done now. Done with the head section. We don't have to do that with the image because images actually already have defined dimensions. Like inside of this image, part of the image information, if you look at the image, is actually like the width and the height. Okay, so I don't have to, you know, having a closing tag is kind of redundant when the browser actually already knows when it's done. There's a couple other tags too that are like that. So up here, you might have seen this a couple times in my documents and wondered what it is. What this basically is doing is setting what characters can be used in my code. It's called a character set or a char set. It doesn't really require a closing tag because it's sort of a one-time action. You're saying, I am using these characters. We don't have to finish because it doesn't matter. Kind of like the doc type. You might have noticed the doc type doesn't have a closing tag. Same thing. It's like we've just declared that the page is an HTML5. It doesn't really have to end. It's sort of a, you know, we just said it's kind of a one-time thing. It's like, hey, this is HTML5. That's it. We don't have to tell it when it's done. There's a couple other tags like this. One of these tags is what's called the break tag, also known as a BR for break. You might have noticed that when you apply a P tag in your, you know, examples or when you did labs, that when you applied them, they skip lines, right? Sometimes we don't necessarily want to skip lines. We just want to go directly to the next line. This would be like equivalent of hitting the return or the enter key on your keyboard, like if I did that. Okay, so that's what a break is. So here in line 21, I've applied a break after the phrase one-sided tags. And so you can see, let me make the page a little bit smaller. Regardless of where this ends up in the line, as soon as it hits that, it automatically goes to the next line because that's what a break does. Breaks don't require a closing tag because once it goes to the next line, it's kind of already done. Like there's no need for a closing tag. Some other ones you might see are like an HR. HR stands for horizontal rule, or HR. Horizontal rules, basically what they do is they make a line that goes across the web page. So if I hit save and I go back and I refresh, this is my horizontal rule right there. Okay. So just, you know, so you may from time to time see HTML tags that don't have closing tags, and probably image is probably the most popular one, but that's okay. It's okay to not always have a closing tag because in those situations, the developers decided that having a closing tag was kind of redundant and unnecessary. So I added a here's my adding the sample1.jpg. Let's add another one. I'm going to add img src equals, let's add in an animated GIF. So let's put in sample4.gif. All right, there's my animated GIF. I can also put in vector files. Remember, a vector file would be something that ends in the extension .svg. So these are vector files here. So let's put in this bunny. So you put in a vector file the same way you would put in a raster file. img src equals, what is it, sample6.svg. Oops, did I misspell something? Oops, it's technically written as sampler, so I misspelled it when I made the file. So we got to put sampler. All right, there you go. Okay. If you want to, I'm not going to go through like every HTML attribute because there's a lot of them actually for images, but some of them you might want to play around with. You can actually put in a width. So defaultly, you know, your image is going to come through at the default size, which is to say, you know, let's look at this example. This cute puppy dog has a width of 250 pixels, so that's what it's defaultly coming through as. If I want it bigger or smaller, you could reset that by using the property, the HTML attribute, width, and just putting in a value. So maybe I'm going to make it 500 pixels. You don't have to put px or anything. You just put in the number. It's defaultly for pixels. I save. You can see it's blowing up the image to be 500 pixels. I'd be careful about blowing up a raster image too big because you can see it starts to distort. That's what happens to raster images. But let's say I did that to the vector. Let's do width equals, I don't know, 800. All right. Because this is a vector, it should always come through nice and smooth, even when it's blown up really, really large. That's kind of the beauty of a vector file, is that it will always maintain its clarity, its resolution compared to this one. All right. And once again, you can kind of see the icons here. I'm going to add in another image. I'm going to add in img src. So we're going to add in an image called flowers.jpg, which is right there. This is the flowers.jpg. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to type in flowers.jpg. Okay. Now, this image is really, really large. It's so large, actually, that I can't actually even show the whole image in the web page, and I have to scroll right and left, which people hate, you know, more than death itself. So the problem is this. Flowers.jpg is about 1200 pixels wide, and my web page is smaller than 1200 pixels. So what's happening here is my web page is probably like, I don't know, like 1,000. By web page, I mean like the browser, not my entire screen, but my browser in this case, Chrome. So what's probably happening is Chrome is roughly about 1,000, and the image of flowers.jpg is probably about 1,200, as we said. So I can't fit the whole, you know, image into the browser because it literally is too big, and that's what, you know, happens with this. So what I might want to do, you know, I could play around with the width property, the width attribute we talked about. I can also just resize the image to be smaller. Resizing the image would actually make the image a little bit smaller in file size, which means it would download. I can also make changes to it. So if I want to make any changes to this image in my web page, what I actually have to do is affect the original image. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm just going to take this to an image editing program like Photopea. So I'm going to open up flowers.jpg, which I accidentally undid its name, but we'll fix that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to resize it. Let's make it 600 by 400. hit OK. And just to, play around with it a little bit, just to show you, I'm just going to draw on it. I'm going to grab this thing about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is just a brush tool. I'm just going to draw an X, okay, just to show you that I made changes to it. And by default, when you bring in the image, it's going to make it a PSD. I can't keep it as a PSD. I want to keep it as export it as a JPEG. So I'm going to go to File, Export, JPEG. And let's call this flowers.jpg. Make sure the quality is all the way up. Hit save. It's going to go to downloads. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the old picture, put in the new version. Okay. So now this is flowers.jpg. It's smaller and it's been changed. So because I've edited the original image, when I go back and I preview that page, it looks like I closed it, but if I go back and I preview this again in a browser, you can see that the image has been edited. Okay. So, if you want to make changes to your image, you don't usually what you do is you edit the image itself in some sort of program like Photoshop or Photopea or whatever you want to use, and that's going to automatically update within the browser. Okay. Last thing I'm going to talk about when it comes to images is how to make an image hyperlink. Okay. So you've probably seen this a lot. So for instance, this is an image. It's in a slideshow, which is a little, well, let's use one of these. All right. This is an image, this thing, probably made in Photoshop or something. I'm going to click on it. And you can see when I clicked on it, it took me to a new web page, right? Or I click on this CalWorks scholarship thing, click, and it takes me to a new web page. Oops. Or I click on, this icon that looks like the Instagram logo. I click, and it takes me to Instagram, so on and so on. So how can we do something like that? Well, it's actually really not that hard. Before we were talking about hyperlinks, right? And making hyperlinks that go to other websites. So normally that would look something like this, where we say, a tag, href for hypertext reference, and then you would put in the URL for the website. So we want this to go to chabotcollege.edu. So I'm just going to go type in chabotcollege.edu into my browser here. I'm just going to highlight this and do a Command-C or Control-C to copy it. And I'm going to go back and paste that bad boy right there. And for now, let's just do a literal link. So I'm just going to say, link to Chabot College. Okay, I'm going to save. Let's go back. There's my link. I can click on it, and it will go. To make something an image link, what you do is rather than using text like I did here, you can put an image in its place. So I already have an image here. It's a little banner I made of Chabot College, and I want this to be image hyperlink. So if someone clicks on this image, it's going to go to the website. I'm going to cut this, put it between this. This is now, quote unquote, the label or the thing that the user is going to click on to interact, to begin the hyperlink to this website. Let's hit save. Let's go back. Let's refresh. You can tell this is now a hyperlink, so I'm going to put my cursor above the image. It turns into a little hand icon. I also get this little tooltip at the bottom. I'm going to click, and it goes to the website. All right. So try that out. Try putting in photos. You can try even putting in your own photos if you want. If you want to put in your own photos, like I said a couple of minutes ago, make sure the HTML file and the image are in the same folder. Okay, so if you want to add your own image, it has to be within the same folder as exercise4.html.